Anxiety and overwhelm are the chief presenting complaints that I hear in coaching sessions. And I know enough by now as a coach that that's not the actual issue. That's the cost of the actual issue, which is living beneath the surface. And it doesn't take too long for me to get to what's really going on because as soon as people start talking to me about whatever they're struggling with, it's pretty clear. A lot of times they'll start telling me how they say yes when they really mean no, how they haven't slept, how they push through when their body is screaming at them that it's exhausted, how they're looking around every corner, terrified of making a mistake or disappointing other people, how they can't find a single hour that belongs just to them, how they can't tolerate a single moment of white space. So, this is not an anxiety problem. This is a self abandonment problem. And I want to talk about what this looks like today because this is a pattern that I see a lot and have gotten really familiar with coaching people through. But before I get all the way into it, I want to zoom out and talk about what even is coaching and what am I doing as a coach? Because I think that term gets overused and used by people who don't have credentials behind the label. So I have been coaching for over 10 years now, and I am a nationally board certified health and wellness coach, which means I've gone through an accredited coaching program, qualified to sit for a board exam, pass the board exam. And what we are trained in as coaches is behavior change and behavioral science. So we have expertise in helping people create sustainable behavior change. And there's a lot that goes into that, but some of the ingredients are understanding motivation and drive, being able to connect people to their strengths and values, their kind of internal markers of meaning, and knowing how to meet people exactly where they are with unconditional positive regard, to listen to them, to listen deeply to what they're saying, but also to what's not being said, what's a few layers beneath the surface, to reflect themselves back, to reflect back what they're saying in a way that articulates something that they feel but can't necessarily understand yet, to give them some better stories to live into, and to elicit information from them. So we do not give advice. We do not have opinions about whether or not people should do anything. Our job is to listen, reflect back, elicit information that harnesses their own internal kind of motivation and desire for change and readiness for change. And then to set goals and action steps with them that help them move forward from wherever they are now to where they want to be, and give them quick wins so that they build what we call self-efficacy, which is a belief in yourself and a belief in your own ability to change. And throughout the way, we're championing them, which doesn't mean we're blowing smoke up their ass or filling the room with toxic positivity, but it's that we're seeing their progress and their wins and reflecting them back to them so that they have this experience of, I can actually do this, even though it's hard, even though I waver sometimes, even though sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back. We're still consistently holding up a mirror of, you got this, I'm here with you, I'm supporting you, and we're moving forward together. And so that being said, let's zoom back into the topic I want to get into today: anxiety and overwhelm and self-abandonment and also self-trust. So many people experience anxiety and overwhelm and burnout and come in really a lot of the times feeling really frustrated because they've tried so many other things. They don't feel better. Nothing's working. Nothing's moving the needle. They've been to therapy. They've read the books. Maybe they've done coaching before. They have, a lot of people I work with have amazing self-awareness. And they're really frustrated because they are still stuck. They don't feel better. And so a lot of times at the beginning, what I'm hearing a lot of is, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I don't want to feel this way anymore. Just make this anxiety go away. But what they don't realize yet is that the anxiety is not the problem. The anxiety is the cost of the problem. And so they're not asking the right questions yet. And so we need to peel back some of the layers and connect some of the dots about what's happening underneath the surface. And I want to also just take a moment to describe kind of who this person is, generally speaking, because I see a lot of the same traits. I tend to work with a lot of people who are very highly functional, very successful. From the outside, they look like they've got everything together. They're checking all the boxes. They have built meaningful lives and careers and relationships, and they look like they're doing everything right. And a lot of times they're just kind of going through the motions, and they're not really present to those lives that look so shiny and impressive on the outside, and they're really stuck in this very overwhelming management project that they're not even really aware that they're stuck in. So it's almost like they're performing this version of stability, of having it all together, but that requires significant effort and energy to maintain. And then underneath the surface of, what looks so good, there's this incredible amount of dissonance and, fragmentation, which I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But there's this sense of internally of like barely holding it together. Like the internal weather is chaotic. It's intense. It's persistent. They're constantly managing it. It's never going away. And for the most part, no one else sees this because they've been really good at managing it alone and out of sight. And what starts to happen by the time they're coming in to coaching a lot of times is this facade or this mask that they're wearing is starting to crack. And they're less efficient at managing everything. And things are starting to fall apart a little bit. So anyway, there's this gap that they're managing, right? There's this gap between what's actually happening inside of them and what they're allowing everyone else on the outside to see. And that gap takes a lot of effort to maintain. It's very energy expensive. And it's draining. And there's a fear of, if I stop managing it, everything's going to fall apart. And so they're very committed to trying to maintain this facade. And here's what that feels like. It feels like just this constant low grade, at least, state of vigilance that never turns off. They're always scanning. They're always looking around the corner, anticipating problems, worried about how everyone else is feeling, trying to stay a couple of steps ahead of everything that could possibly go wrong and hedge for all of those potential liabilities. There's also a chronic, low level sense of failure that they can't quite locate the source of, but there's this nagging sense that I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm failing at something. Don't know exactly what it is, but I can feel it. And that's also very uncomfortable. And so all of this is there's a longing in them that's pretty pronounced, but they can't quite articulate what it is that they're longing for. It's not more success. It's not less stress. It's something more like being able to stop managing, being able to put this burden down, being able to exist just as they are and have that be enough. But they don't believe really that that's possible. They believe that their value is wrapped up in all of this doing and maintaining this performance. And so, they're just kind of stuck in this like attempt to control everything around them all the time. And they're very oriented outward a lot of the times. They're oriented outward for acceptance and belonging, for validation, for meaning. They attach a lot of importance to their job, to their financial security, to what they own, to their status. And oftentimes, when that's going on at the same exact time, what that's telling me, so that's overdeveloped, right? What's underdeveloped is their internal sense of safety, or their ability to just kind of root down inside of themselves and feel coherent and feel safe and feel anchored within themselves. Yeah, so I'd just say that they don't feel safe in their body, and they almost, a lot of the times I hear that they have like an adversarial relationship with their body. And they want to feel better. They want to feel present. They want to spend less time in their minds, spinning around, ruminating, overthinking. They want a relationship with things like slowness and wonder and pleasure and play that they struggle to feel like they can access. Yeah, maybe the last thing I'll say for now is that oftentimes they are also a lot more organized around appearance than reality, what I would call reality, just an honest relationship with what actually is. They are performing a version of reality that in their minds is safer or guarantees belonging or access, or that is more impressive to other people. And so it makes sense, right? That if this is the presentation, that people who are living this way would have a lot of patterns of self-abandonment. So that can look different. A lot of times they exhibit a lot of these patterns, but here's some examples. So people pleasing is self-abandonment. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you bend yourself around what someone else wants or needs, even if that's different from what you want or need, or maybe you haven't even checked in with yourself, you're leaving yourself. Perfectionism is self-abandonment. Every time you manage your how you're seen or other people's perception of you rather than making honest contact, showing up honestly with as a human, how you actually are. Every time you perform the more acceptable version, or you stress yourself out, going over the details a million times, you are leaving yourself. Overdoing or overworking is self-abandonment. Every time your body sends you a clear signal, I'm tired, I have to pee, I'm thirsty, I'm done, and you override it because stopping feels unsafe, because your worth is tangled up in your output, you're leaving yourself. Overthinking, same thing. Your mind's spinning around in circles trying to manage something mentally that cannot be managed mentally. So there's all kinds of examples that kind of underneath the surface, the issue is the same. It's I'm leaving myself. And that creates this gap between what you know is true and how you're actually living or behaving. And every time you leave yourself, you're collecting evidence that you're not reliable, that you can't trust yourself. That there's two versions of you, one that knows what's right and another who doesn't follow through on that. And so over time, this compounds and you lose trust in yourself. You lose confidence that you know which version is actually going to show up or who you actually are. You become illegible to yourself. And that creates this experience of internal dissonance. Like there's something internally that feels incongruent. And that sends a distress signal, which you feel as anxiety. But it's starting from this gap between who you are and what you do. And then to make matters worse, a lot of times what happens is, that is felt, that gap or that leaving is felt. And instead of understanding it as a developmental problem, right? Like, I haven't built the capacity to do this yet, or I wasn't taught patterns that serve me in this way. It gets interpreted instead as a character problem, right? So the questions are more like, what's wrong with me? Or maybe this is just who I am. And then there's this sense of permanence that's really sad to witness, where people have just concluded, well, this is just how I am, and there's something defective about me. And that's really sad to witness, but it's also something that we can work on in coaching. We can replace those stories with more accurate stories, and we can develop the capacities that are missing so people get the evidence that they need and increase the capacity to stay with themselves and borrow the belief that I have in them until they believe in themselves. But here's what I think is happening underneath all of this. There's an incongruence. There's this, again, this internal experience of being fragmented, of there being a split. The version of you that knows and the version of you that performs something safer. Part of you that can see the truth and the part of you that does the other thing anyway. And so this creates dissonance. It creates an experience of being at war with yourself, of not being able to trust yourself, of not knowing, of feeling unreliable to yourself, right? Because you can't trust which version of you is going to show up. Is it the one who's exhausted and desperately needs rest? Or is it the one who's going to push through anyway? Is it the one who says, I know this relationship is not working? Or is it the one who stays anyway? Is it the one who knows exactly what they want? Or the one who's constantly deferring to everyone else? So when you live in that fragmentation long enough, that's your permanent state of being disconnected from your truth. Your body reacts to that because you're living in a chronic state of contradiction and you're divided against yourself. And this creates a distress signal that is felt throughout your whole body. Something's not right. And that's the anxiety. That feels like anxiety, but it's like this internal static, this internal chaos that can't be resolved. And so it's just this constant experience of the alarm bells going off. But that's a reaction. So that's the cost. It's a reaction to this deeper problem of there being incongruence internally. And that doesn't just produce anxiety, it produces all kinds of other hard, uncomfortable things too. So again, it's energetically expensive. There's a massive energy leak if you're engaged in this very complex management project. So much of your energy is being tangled up in that. You're in a constant state of vigilance, keeping track of who knows what and what version of myself shows up here and what version of myself shows up over here. That's also exhausting. You're stuck in overthinking, people pleasing, shame, this feeling also of never being seen, never being witnessed, because you're working very hard to make sure that you aren't, because you're hiding. And so, of course, you're not seen. And that feels terrible. That feels lonely. And then you're aware at some level of the fact that you're leaving yourself and that there's a gap between knowing one thing and doing another. And so, what we need to work on here is closing that gap, is creating more congruence and ultimately more self-trust and ultimately more self-respect, where you become more reliable to yourself and to others. And so self-trust is really your ability to trust your own perception and judgment and to act on what you know consistently enough that you stop leaving yourself and you stop surprising yourself. You know, you said you would do something and you did do it. You felt the no and you honored it. You knew what you needed and you asked for it. Not necessarily perfectly. I'm not saying this is easy, but you are actively committed to closing that gap, to building more alignment, and to staying with yourself rather than abandoning yourself. And over time, with enough reps here, with enough evidence, you you believe more that you are somebody who you can count on, someone who can make themselves a promise and actually keep it. And someone who believes that when life asks something difficult of you, you can stay connected to yourself. You don't have to escape or avoid or override. You don't have to abandon what you know in order to manage the moment, but you can handle it, you can meet it. And then you start collecting evidence in a different direction, right? Like instead of stacking evidence against yourself, like I always leave, I always escape, I always avoid, I can't handle this. I want to reduce the discomfort, I want to take care of everyone else. Instead, you start collecting evidence of not doing that, of staying with yourself, of doing the harder, truer, more honest thing. And so, what you're essentially doing is you're learning to stay and you're building capacity through practice, through repeated experiences of doing something different, of laying these new bricks and building these new patterns until they become more of the default than the old one does. You're slowly, gradually upgrading your operating system. And this takes time and it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of energy and a lot of practice. You're returning to yourself again and again and again and again. You're choosing to stay with yourself. So that looks like noticing when your body is sending you a clear no and honoring it, listening to it, telling the truth, even when the truth has stakes, even when there's a softer version that's easier to name or easier to hear. Keeping the promises you make to yourself. Staying with something uncomfortable long enough for it to teach you something instead of immediately managing it away. Right? And so when you get this is all evidence, when you start stacking this evidence up, your relationship to yourself changes. You start to slowly become someone you can count on. That gap is narrower. There's less fragmentation. You're less illegible to yourself, and then you're building congruence. So there's less and less and less of this experience of being split against yourself and more alignment between your insides and outsides just matching up. And the more congruent you are internally, the more you trust yourself. And the less of that distress signal is being, that's running through your body. This emergency alarm that feels like anxiety that naturally goes away because you've gotten to the root of the issue. And the more you trust yourself, the more you can act in alignment with your true values and your behavior and your doing naturally springs from who you are, and there's less conflict there. There's less contradiction there. And the more you act in alignment with your values and you build this self-trust, the more you respect yourself. You like yourself. You are who you are. And you have a level of respect that you didn't have before. Because you didn't respect yourself when you were constantly self-abandoning. You had a low opinion of who you were. And you had patterns that you interpreted as being character flaws. And so you didn't respect yourself. But you start to build that out. And you start to have this much cleaner relationship with yourself where there's a lot less management happening too. And so you also have more energy available. So there's also this sense of peace that you begin to have access to because you're freeing yourself from this endless attempt to manage and outrun everything and avoid everything and escape everything that feels uncomfortable. But you just deal with it, and you learn that you can handle it and that you're okay. And so there's not, like a bypassing or an absence of challenge, but it's a belief that I can handle challenge. And there's more energy for your life. And there's a sense of peace that comes with that. It's very profound. And you're no longer at war with yourself. And you're free from that. And then not just you have a better relationship with yourself, but others perceive you as also being more capable, trustworthy, reliable, put together in the sense of having integrity, not performance. This is somebody who I can trust to do what they say. And so this is really one of the main arcs that I witness in coaching all the time, where people come in, again, frustrated, tired of feeling anxious, tired of feeling this internal sense of dysregulation and discomfort and an inability to kind of like find the ground. And really, what I would say is underneath that they're not explicitly asking for, but I can sense that what people really need to hear and what they really need to believe about themselves is that they're not broken, that they're okay, but they don't believe that yet. They believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And then they move through this work and they very often leave feeling much more secure and grounded in themselves with a stronger sense of self-trust and with a return. It's like a homecoming. It's a return to themselves. It's an honoring of their own signals and wants and needs that makes them feel this. It's more than just confidence. It's like they feel very empowered and they feel very connected to themselves and stronger in showing up externally as who they truly are internally. And so here's what I'll leave you with. Maybe you're feeling this way. Maybe right now you feel like you have an anxiety problem and you've been trying to solve that for a long time and it hasn't worked. And it's not because you haven't tried, it's because that's not the right problem. What you have is a capacity problem. The capacity to stay connected to yourself when life asks something difficult of you. The capacity to act on what you already know to be true. The capacity to stop abandoning yourself in the moments that matter. And here's why this is so important. Because a character problem has no solution. A character problem lands you in shame and you cannot change from shame. A capacity problem has a solution. Capacity can be built, it can be practiced. You get your reps in. You show up one step at a time, one day at a time, one rep at a time, until this new way of being becomes more familiar than the old one and the operating system upgrades over time. And so the question is always not what's wrong with you, but what are you going to practice? Now that you know, what are you going to do about it? I'd love for you to tell me what you're going to practice. If you want to leave a comment or respond to this email or send me a message, let me know. What are you going to practice? Okay, take really good care, and I'll see you soon.